Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Tuesday, December the 24th, 2024. Today there is a square aspect between Jupiter and Saturn. This is an important aspect. It is kind of like a marker. It's not that necessarily anything is going to happen today, but it gives us an idea about where we are on the cycle. Remember, there was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in 2020, at the end of 2020. And this Jupiter-Saturn square is perhaps going to be important for society, for the economy, and it's, in many respects, a point of crisis, but perhaps a fortunate crisis. It may well be in some parts of the world that things aren't necessarily going to get any worse. So I think there is something optimistic to say about this Jupiter-Saturn square. And I'm possibly optimistic about the United States. And this may be one of the reasons why I've got Donald Trump on the thumbnail. Also, we have to remember that Donald Trump has a Jupiter square Saturn in his horoscope. And it's kind of interesting that he's becoming president at the time of Jupiter square Saturn. Anyway, I'll be looking at all that later in the video. But first of all, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is December the 24th, 2024. So here is the picture of the planets, the chart set for noon, December the 24th. And we can see that the moon is in Libra, moving into the Via Combusta. So the Via Combusta is that part of the sky between 15 Libra, 15 Scorpio. When the moon is in Libra, that late part of Libra, early Scorpio, things can happen. It's a time of instability when we make plans, but somehow those plans just don't work. Doesn't mean to say that the plans are a failure, but we have to be prepared to change those plans at short notice. That is the nature of the moon in the Via Combusta. So I suppose today's Christmas Eve, tomorrow's Christmas Day. So, if you've got plans over Christmas and they're very rigid plans, then I would suggest you loosen them up a little. And for example, don't necessarily assume that people will turn up on time or that arrangements will run smoothly. So a bit of flexibility can go a long way if you're trying to have a sort of a smooth and happy Christmas. But moon in Libra is making a trine to Venus. In fact, that moon trine Venus is just about the only aspect happening today. And there is a Jupiter square Saturn, but geocentrically, that's about it. I mean, at least it's the only aspect that is exact today. And so moon trine Venus, it's a very civilized aspect because the moon and Venus are both in air signs. So it's easy to talk. It's easy to talk on a sort of a fairly sort of civilized note, and there isn't so much emotion around. The moon does go into Scorpio later on tomorrow, but not at the moment. The moon's not in Scorpio, and I suppose that's kind of good if you celebrate Christmas on December the 24th, isn't it? A lot of people kind of celebrate it. The big day or the big moment is literally Christmas Eve, and that was a bit of a surprise when I was living in Slovakia. The meal at the very end of Christmas Eve was really special. People ate carp. I don't eat fish. I'm a vegetarian, but it was traditional in Slovakia to eat carp on Christmas Eve and to make sure the soup is right. It was a big deal, Christmas Eve. by Christmas Day it was just another day almost. It was almost a bit of an anticlimax. Christmas Day, the main event was over. But so that's kind of good if you're in a culture where Christmas Eve is what matters rather than Christmas Day, because by Christmas Day the moon is moving into Scorpio, and maybe that's not so good. So that moon trine Venus, I would have said, dominates the day, and it does in some respects look quite civilized, and there's good interaction between people, and it doesn't get too emotional. Now, the moon also is sort of in trine to Jupiter, and because if you look at what's happening, we've got moon at 22 Libra, which is trine Jupiter. I mean, it's not an exact trine to Jupiter, but there is a grand trine feel to today, and that perhaps emphasizes what I was saying. It is civilized. People have ideas. People are prepared to talk, and things don't get nasty. That's always good on a Christmas Eve. Things will, of course, change when the moon goes into Scorpio. The moon's not in Scorpio today. Now, the main aspect is a square between Jupiter and Saturn. The most important aspect is Jupiter square Saturn. Jupiter in Pisces square Saturn in... Sorry, let's say it again. Jupiter in Gemini square Saturn in Pisces. So Jupiter square Saturn... It is a big deal, but that doesn't necessarily mean that anything is going to happen like today. It is a marker. It represents where we are on a cycle, and it's more about perhaps the end of 24 into 2025. We've already started to experience some of the events of Jupiter square Saturn. I suppose even Trump getting elected, I think, was part of Jupiter square Saturn. You could also say that the shooting of the United Healthcare CEO happened fairly close to the Jupiter square Saturn. I think these events are very different, but very in some respects related, because they kind of give us an idea about the times we're moving into. Although, as I will be discussing at the end of this video, there are perhaps grounds for optimism in terms of Trump's presidency, but guarded optimism. It's difficult to be absolutely sure right now, but I'll be looking at that very soon. I also want to consider what things look like if you happen to be in Australia or New Zealand. So here's noon today, Australia, New Zealand. You can see that the moon is earlier. The moon is at 14 degrees Libra. So if you are in Australia, New Zealand, the main aspect is not really moon trine Venus, it's moon trine Jupiter. And so the positive things I was saying about Christmas Eve when I was centering the chart on New York are kind of even better if you're in Australia or New Zealand. It's moon trine Jupiter day. Then the moon makes a trine to Jupiter, makes a trine to Venus. So I think in Australia, New Zealand, Eastern Asia, if you happen to be watching us from Vladivostok, for example, I think it's going to be good. I think it's overall a good day. It doesn't seem to be too much pressure. And the moon is a long way from moving into Scorpio. Now we do have to consider the heliocentric picture. Now, heliocentric picture very much is focused on Mercury, I would have said. So turning to the heliocentric view, putting the Sun at the centre of the solar system, there is Mercury. You can see Mercury is in Virgo, and it's opposition Saturn, it's opposition Neptune. So it's opposition the Saturn-Neptune midpoint. Now, that Mercury aspect does give a different flavour to the day. I mean, Mercury opposition Saturn opposition Neptune is difficult, it is confused, it is nervous. I mean, that's because you've got Mercury opposition Saturn and Neptune. Saturn and Neptune as a pair are nervous. There is a lot of fear about Saturn and Neptune. And, just a reminder that heliocentrically now you can see that Saturn and Neptune are getting closer and closer. There will be a Saturn-Neptune conjunction just coming up. I suppose heliocentrically that will be next year. And Mercury is picking up on that on all of that. So Mercury may represent the concept of understanding something. We can feel something moving, we can feel something changing, and there is fear in the air. And so we just had Mercury opposition Saturn, something holding us back, and we should not forget that geocentrically Mercury is moving to a square of Saturn. That square of Saturn is not exact yet, but I think we're very much starting to feel it. And then Mercury is moving to an opposition of Neptune, and so Mercury opposition Neptune is a bit confused, and we don't quite know what's going on. We know there are things going on, but it's a bit difficult to handle them all. So the question is that Mercury opposition Saturn and Neptune going to manifest in the here and now for ordinary people? Possibly not. And it may just say something about the world in which we're living. So let me now move to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Tuesday, December the 24th, 2024. Aries. Aries, I think it can be quite a good day, and it doesn't have to be a particularly spectacular day to be a good day. I mean, the moon is making a trine to Venus, and moon trine Venus represents a time when you do feel that things are starting to move, not dramatically, but other people may be more responsive than usual to you, and if you want to be out there mixing with other people, you might not see fireworks, but I think there's just going to be a sense that there is a closeness there. You've got things to talk about, and you can come over as being a pleasant person, and there's no need to assert yourself too much. I think that's probably unnecessary. You can just see what's happening. You can see what's happening, and you can just go with it, and you don't feel that you have to understand things. In fact, I don't think you will understand things. Remember, heliocentrically, Mercury is opposition Neptune. Things are going to be a bit up in the air, and you'll know that things are up in the air. And if you try too hard to make sense of what's happening, I don't think you'll get anywhere. So today, Aries, there might be a good reason for a certain amount of passivity. Just seeing where other people want to go, but not doing anything dramatic. I mean, I suppose that may be stating the obvious because it's Christmas Eve, and so people probably try not to do anything dramatic. And if you do try to do something dramatic, then maybe it won't work because you simply don't understand what's going on. You don't fully understand what's going on. And actually, Aries, it would be quite good if you could remain in that space of just not knowing. It can be actually quite a good place to be, just not knowing. If you don't know, then you know that you can't take action. You don't rush to judgment. You can perhaps just let things unfold in their own way, and it's certainly not a time for dramatic pronouncements. Jupiter might be in Gemini, but Jupiter is retrograde in Gemini. It's also making a square to Saturn. So you might feel that you kind of want to say something important, but part of you just knows it's not the right thing to do, and so it just might be a good time to be just quite, as I've said, fairly passive. Though it should be noted that the Sun is still making a square to the North Node. The Sun was making a square to the North Node, and of course making a square to the South Node as well. So with that Sun square North Node, I think there are limits to how passive you want to be. I think you can be passive on matters which are not important. If by any off chance you are working on Christmas Eve, then that Sun square North Node may actually be important. It may be just as Christmas is starting that you just feel that there's something that has to be done, something where you just need to assert yourself. You need to make something clear, and I think that is quite specific, because I don't think that overall your own mind is particularly clear, but it won't be out of any mental process that you feel that something has to be done. It will be more sort of intuitive. You just feel, hold on, something hasn't been sorted out. It needs to be sorted out. And that might be how the Sun square North Node is working. Taurus. It's Christmas Eve. The moon is in Libra, and with the moon being in Libra, still in Libra, it may be a time when you do want things to be above board, and you want things to be straightforward. I mean, that's natural, isn't it? But as I was saying yesterday, you can't expect everything to go to plan, especially now with the moon moving into the Via Combusta. I mean, I understand that Taurians can be quite set in their ways, and they can have a sort of a fixed view about the way things should unfold. But if your view is too fixed, I think you're going to feel quite frustrated. And you've just got to understand, Taurus, that things just might not go to plan. And the moon is in the Via Combusta. And moon in Libra in the Via Combusta, might represent you trying to make sense of things, trying to make sure that all the arrangements are in order, but still something happens that you maybe weren't expecting, and you don't want to change your plans, but changing your plans might be the right thing to do. And if you can just handle a bit of uncertainty, I think that would be a really good thing. Now, the moon does make a trine to Venus. Venus is, of course, your ruler, and that moon trine Venus is good. It's a nice aspect. It means that if you are sufficiently flexible, you can deal with things happening that weren't planned for. Then it can be a day that runs its course relatively smoothly, and I think that your ability to get on with other people will be good. Now, from a working perspective, if you happen to be working over the day, that moon trine Venus may be especially useful. Venus is in a high-profile sign in your chart, Aquarius, and the moon is making that trine to Venus. So there are things you can do today which are going to be of great value. Again, don't commit yourself to fixed plans. Whatever you're doing, that is really important. But still, certain things need to be sorted out, or rather can be sorted out. And it may be Christmas, but things are still going on in many cases. So So today, I think that you can smooth over things, and make sure if something needs to be resolved, then I think you can resolve it. And I think that your ability to project yourself and your personality are going to be very good. And Moon trine Venus, as I've already suggested, is an aspect that can be very useful for relationships. And overall, for you at the moment, relationships do seem to be working quite well, and you can just relate to the world at large in quite an easy way. And that would indicate that you're someone who does get noticed. So if you're with people, even if you don't know them well, I think that you are making an impact, and people do want to know you, and you've got something to offer. And so I do think that relationships can be intensified, and it just helps that you come over in the right way, and you come over, I think, as an attractive person. And attractive means you attract, and people for some reason are attracted to you at the moment. And really, that's all I've got to say. Gemini, there's sort of a grand trine in air today. We've got planets in air signs. We've got Venus in Aquarius. We've got Moon in Libra. We've got Jupiter in Gemini. So with this grand trine in air, it might be feeling that things are really moving in a pleasant and interesting way. And I think, Gemini, there'll be plenty of things to amuse you, and also, it's important not to be complacent, not to be lazy. I think there are things that you can do that today are of real value, that demonstrate that you are special. But the trouble about grand trines, and I think we can say that there is a grand trine in air signs, the trouble about grand trines is that they can be just a little too easy. There can be a laziness to grand trines. And so it is possible that you don't apply yourself. There are opportunities, but you just kind of go with it. You could take the view, well, it's Christmas Eve, nothing much has to be done. And in the process, you could miss an opportunity. So use that grand trine. And don't ever take the view that something is going to be too much work. Because something that seems to be too much work may actually not be much work at all, if you just give it a chance. So try to apply yourself today. And I'm not talking about doing anything that is boring, just something that might be more challenging. And you might then realize that you've got something really quite outstanding to offer. And it doesn't matter what the day is, doesn't matter whether it's Christmas or not. It's going to get attention, and I think it's going to get favourable attention. And in general, Gemini, it's a time when I think people are going to like you, and it's as simple as that. Because you are a fun person to have around, and you've got interesting things to suggest, interesting things to say, and you may even be able to take advantage of other people's confusion, because the moon is moving into the Via Combustor, and of course when the moon is moving into the Via Combustor, it's a time when things often don't work to plan. But being a Gemini, you can deal with that kind of situation. You can improvise, and your ability to improvise today and to come up with solutions and stopgaps and that kind of thing is going to be really outstanding, and you won't have to think about it too much. It'll be obvious. So perhaps it's a day when you can be a real Gemini and be appreciated for being a real Gemini. Cancer. Cancer, the moon continues moving through Libra, and with the moon moving through Libra, you may feel that, like yesterday, there's not a great deal that you have to do. You've created a space for yourself. You understand what you want. You understand what you don't want, and really that's it. It's Christmas. I mean, I suppose I don't want to impose any cultural values on you. It may not be Christmas. You may not be a Christian. You may not be in a Christian culture. So my apologies for that if there's a cultural mismatch there. But even if it's not Christmas, you just feel that it's a time where you do value your own space. And I would have said that it's important that you don't miss opportunities, though, because the moon is making a trine to Jupiter and a trine to Venus. Now, that trine to Jupiter is going to be particularly strong if you're in Australia or New Zealand or Vladivostok or East Asia in general, but it's still around. There's still this grand trine involving the moon. And so with this grand trine, you might be able to close the shutters down and close the bomb doors down and all that kind of whatever you have to do. But that doesn't mean to say that life stops, that there's nothing that has to be done. There's lots of stuff that can be done. And certainly in terms of the people you choose to have around you, for example, your family and close friends, you can be really active, and you can have lots of ideas, and you may not even seem to be a typical Cancerian. I know Cancer is a very emotional sign, at least that's the textbook view of Cancerians, but it does seem that you're actually going to come over as, in your own world, surrounded by people you trust, you're going to come over as someone who is quite easygoing, quite flexible, quite comfortable with yourself, and that's because the moon is trine Venus and the moon is trine Jupiter. There's very important aspects, and they are in air signs, so they don't come over as being too emotional, and so maybe emotional stuff doesn't have to take center stage, provided you're safe. Because if you're in an emotionally comfortable place, then in a way you don't have to show your emotions. In a way, I mean, ironic as that might sound, and with moon trine Venus, I think that relationships should prosper. And there'll just be a natural ease to your relations with the people close to you. And I suppose if you're in a situation where you're meeting people you don't know and you're feeling secure, you do know how to make people feel comfortable with that moon trine Venus, and also with that moon trine Jupiter. And there is a possibility with this grand trine in air that you can actually do things to make yourself feel even safer, even more comfortable, and you might have one eye to the future. It may be that you feel that certain things need to be grounded and understood, and if you can ground yourself and understand what's going on and not advertise the fact, that may actually be laying sort of good foundations for the future. Now, one word about close relationships. yes, it's true that the moon is trine Venus, and moon trine Venus is a really nice aspect for relationships, particularly close relationships. But at the same time, Jupiter is square Saturn, and that Jupiter square Saturn, is exact today. Okay, it was exact yesterday, it's exact tomorrow, but it's completely exact today. But that Jupiter square Saturn might say something about relationships, and might say something about the important people in your life and what they are experiencing. I think some of the important people in your life may feel a little bit challenged because they feel that they need something else, and they're not entirely satisfied with the way things are, and they want a bit more. And maybe you should try to understand this and try to understand what's bugging them. I don't think it's a majorly serious issue, but if you can talk to the people who are close to you, people whose life you are having an impact on, if you can talk to these people and talk about their aspirations, and then you might find out something interesting. And maybe the challenge in terms of relationships is to accommodate another person's aspirations. Leo, you do feel that there is a fair amount to be said, and I think that if you've got something on your mind, I don't think you'll have many difficulties articulating it, and whatever you have to say, I think you'll be able to say it in a way that doesn't cause too much confusion, doesn't rock the boat. I think you just know. You know what people want. You know what people want to hear, and I think you're very much able to provide it. And you're helped by the fact that the moon is making a trine to Venus. So the moon is in Libra. It's a very communicative part of the sky, Libra, in the Leo chart, and the moon is making a trine to Venus, and that moon trine Venus does help you get on with people. You can say the right thing. You know what people want to hear. It might not be what you want to say, but if you can put other people first, tell them what they want to hear, I do think that will very much be appreciated. And in general, I think that you're able to create a good impression. You may not want to create a good impression, but with very little effort, I think that is something you can do. So now, I suppose, as it's Christmas Eve, I mean, okay, that does depend on your culture, but if you're in a culture where Christmas Eve is important, then it might actually be a good idea to talk to people. Talk to people you haven't talked to before. Because I suppose it's Christmas anyway, and because it's Christmas, people are often more open to people saying hello to them. I mean, especially neighbours. So if you haven't talked to your neighbour for a long time, with the moon trine Venus, and the moon is actually in a sector of your chart which is not just about communication, it is about neighbours. And if you can relate to your neighbours, or find some way to relate to your neighbours, that would be great. And you may never talk to your neighbours, but if you can just say something to them with moon trine Venus, then I think you might be pleased with the result, and that might help break the ice. And maybe you and your neighbours need to talk about something. And now, with the moon trine Venus, and also the moon making a trine to Jupiter, that would be a great thing to do. And neighbours, they can be many different people. It's not just someone who physically lives next door to you or above you if you live in an apartment, or below you. It can just be about people who you talk to, who rather you see all the time but you never talk to, and now's a chance to talk to them with that moon trine Venus. And I think it will just be very easy, very smooth, and so that's one way in which you could be looking at today. And also, it might be a good idea if there's just constant low-level action today, just doing lots of different things, making even lots of different trips, little trips. That might be something that you're doing today. I know that's something that people can do quite a lot on Christmas Eve, but if you make these small trips, going a few hundred yards, could be a couple of miles, to see someone, visit someone, say hello to someone, and then you go somewhere else, then that'll help keep things moving. And I think that's something you very much can do with Moon trine Jupiter, Moon trine Venus. So overall, it doesn't strike me as being a very dramatic day, but it's a day when you're constantly doing stuff, doing different things, and I think you feel that you are going in the right direction. And yeah, if you can talk to people that you don't usually talk to, I think that would be great. Virgo, it's a day when you're, I think, relatively sociable. I think your ability to get on with people is pretty good. I mean, not in an especially dramatic way, but you know how to introduce yourself, you know how to listen. I think that if you talk to people you perhaps haven't talked to before, I think you can make a good impression. And at the same time, you do seem to understand what is important, and that is because the moon is in Libra, and from a Virgo perspective, the moon in Libra can be about money. And I mean, I know money is perhaps not something one wants to be obsessing about on Christmas Eve, but it perhaps is inevitable that financial issues, they feel as if they're sort of just round the corner. And the moon is in the Vir combustor. So perhaps with the moon in the Vir combustor, just before Christmas, there may be a few surprises financially that in a first instance, you might knock you off course, might be something you don't want to hear. But I wouldn't worry about it too much. The moon is in the Vir combustor every month. The moon is obviously there in the Libra every single month. This time round, the moon is trine Venus and trine Jupiter. So if there are any financial surprises or there are sudden demands to spend money, you don't have to be knocked off balance. With moon making a trine of Venus and a trine of Jupiter, you can make sense of things pretty quickly and start to understand what the right approach actually is. And it may even be financially that you can turn the tables. You have a situation which is surprising, that might seem to be working not to your advantage, but if you're quick and decisive, you can turn things around, and actually there might be a financial advantage here, something you can take advantage of. I mean, that is actually a reasonable thing to say, because there is a grand trine in air signs, and this grand trine does involve the moon in Libra. So with this grand trine, from a financial perspective, you can actually do some quite useful things. And perhaps other people don't know what to do, but actually, Virgo, you do know what to do, and you know what is required of you. But don't get too caught up on financial issues. The Sun is making a square to the North Nodes, the North Node and the South Node, because the Sun is in early Capricorn, and it's square the North Node, square the South Node. And that Sun in Capricorn is maybe challenging you to look beyond the material and to the material. When I say material, I mean the material in a very gross sort of superficial way. To look beyond that, and to look at something actually more fundamental. It's not the money that matters. It's about doing something that is a fundamental expression of who you are. And that's how you should be using the sun in Capricorn. And the sun has only just started moving in Capricorn, and I think with the sun sun moving through Capricorn, it is a time, Virgo, when you need to accept that there are some things that you're absolutely brilliant at doing, and no one can do it better. And with the sun moving through Capricorn, square the nodes, there might be a moment of challenge. Something's holding you back. You're thinking about all the reasons why you can't do it, and then there may be a sense of release, and you realize what can be done. And then, Virgo, there's no excuses. You can just go for it. Libra. So Libra, Moon still moving through your sign, and Moon is making a really nice aspect to Venus. Moon trine Venus is also making a trine to Jupiter. That Moon trine Jupiter will be stronger if you're in Australia or New Zealand, but I think everyone will experience it to some extent. So we have a grand trine in air signs, and so Libra, there is really no reason why it can't be a really good day. I suppose what Christmas Eve is all about. Christmas Eve is supposed to be a day for having a good time, for enjoying yourself, and okay, that there might be some cultural dependency there, but for you, this grand trine is smooth. Things by and large should work out, though I have to say that the Moon is in the Via Combuster. Now, the Moon moves into Libra every month, and that's always good for you. But the last half of the Libra is, of course, Via Combuster. So that may actually be part of the Libran experience. So, what the Via Combuster is about is things happening that you perhaps had not expected, and you have to make sudden adjustments, maybe social adjustments. And I actually think that you really can handle it. You can handle it. You can deal with it. You know how to respond. And so, when I say things will go to plan, yeah, things will go to plan, but it's a plan that's quite broad, and it assumes that other people are perhaps a law unto themselves. People might do something unexpected. They might be late. They might cancel. They might behave in a strange way. But Libra, I think you can take it all in your stride. I don't think it bothers you. And maybe as a Libra, at some level, you have a good understanding of human nature, of human organization, the way people fit together. And so that shouldn't be a problem. In fact, it could be, if things don't go to plan, you take it into your stride, but other people don't. And so maybe it's a case, Libra, where you have to deal with other people's fussiness, other people's obsession about detail. You understand that things happen. Other people might not. So perhaps the challenge today, if there is any challenge today, is to explain why things aren't 100% going to plan. Even though you know as far as you're concerned, they're completely going to plan. Other people might be just rather too focused on stupid details. So that is certainly a possibility. But with Moon trine Venus, it really is a good day, and I think it's a good day for getting on with people. I think that you'll know how to behave. You'll know what people like. You'll know what people dislike, and at the same time, I don't think you're going to be too serious. I think that you will have a light touch, and I think that you'll be good at small talk, and you'll be able to put people at their ease, and at the same time, you're not going to be too intense. I don't think it is an intense day. It's not a day where you want much intensity, if anything at all. I mean, emotion is something that would in a way spoil the day. Emotion is the last thing you need. So just keep everything on a light level, and then I think that everything will be fine, and it is a chance to get on with people, and get on to people maybe you don't know, and to perhaps add to your contact list. Scorpio, it's Christmas, I suppose. Christmas is upon us, and I do think that Christmas Eve might be a different day from Christmas Day. I mean, Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, there is one big difference between Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, and the big difference represents the moon sign. Christmas Eve, the 24th, we've got the moon in Libra. Christmas Day, we've got the moon in Scorpio. So that does represent a big change. And I would have said that you're going to be more yourself, for better or for worse, on Christmas Day than Christmas Eve. I mean, today, the 24th, I think that there are things that you maybe want to hold back on. You're not entirely in the mood for throwing yourself into the day's festivities, if there are festivities today. I mean, it depends on where you are, depends on your culture, but there's something that you really do want to hold back, and in a way, you're quite private today. You don't feel that excessive socializing is necessary or desirable. You can still get on with people very well. I mean, the moon in Libra is making a trine to Venus, it's making a trine to Jupiter, and so that gives you the ability to be sympathetic, but ideally you want to be on your own you want things to happen on your own terms, and you don't want things to happen if you haven't planned them, if you haven't organized them, if you haven't made space for them, if you haven't tried to accommodate them. So in that sense, Scorpio, I don't think today you really want surprises. You want people to behave as expected. Now, you might be slightly disappointed because the moon is in the Vir combustor. When the moon is in the Vir combustor, things can just happen, things that you hadn't made an allowance for. And if things do just happen, Scorpio, don't worry about it. Take it all into your stride, and I think that everything will be fine. And you know, moon trine Venus does allow you to make other people happy, particularly if those people are important to you, like in terms of your family. You know what they want. I think they know what you want as well. So it just may be a day when you can create a secure environment for yourself and not have to worry too much. And one thing, it's probably a bad idea to make finite plans. I mean, I don't know if that's what you're planning on doing. I don't know if you're planning on making plans, but it's not a day for making plans. Because if you were to make plans, or you were to organize something afresh, then I'm not entirely convinced that you'd know what you were doing, and you might get confused. And so changes of plan, that's perhaps one reason why you don't want a change of plan, because if you have a change of plan, that means you've got to rethink the situation. And if you try and rethink the situation, you might not reach the right conclusions. So if any plan changes are required, I would suggest you get someone else to do it. I don't think you're in the mood to organize things right now. At least organize things afresh, because if you try to work things out on your own, I think there's a possibility that you get confused and you might make mistakes, but I wouldn't worry about it. I think the main thing is to just have a sort of a happy and secure day, and if you can avoid surprises, then so much the better. Sagittarius. Sagittarius, the main aspect today is a square between Jupiter and Saturn. Now, I don't know whether you're going to feel this. I mean, Jupiter and Saturn are social planets. They don't relate to the personal realm. But, Jupiter is your ruler, and we can't avoid that, and I think you might feel it. And so, how would you experience Jupiter square Saturn? So, Jupiter square Saturn might be experienced as some kind of restriction, but I don't think that I'm telling you anything new. This Jupiter square Saturn is not something that suddenly appeared today. I mean, these aspects, they take time to form. This Jupiter square Saturn has been forming for a long time. In fact, you could say that really, for much of 2024, Jupiter and Saturn have had this square relationship. I mean, Jupiter has been in Gemini, still in Gemini. Saturn is in Pisces, so there is a natural square relationship between those two planets. And there was an exact Jupiter square Saturn earlier in the year. I think it was in August, and there were some events. Remember the Bayesian, that boat that had I can't remember his name. This guy who was very rich on board, and it got destroyed by some water spout off the coast of Sicily. And that happened very, very close to a square of Jupiter Saturn. And now we've got Jupiter Saturn again, and it's happening. It's exact today. So if we want to sort of break that aspect down, we could say, well, there's Jupiter. Jupiter is you, and that's what you want to do. And there are things restricting you, represented by Saturn, and Saturn's in Pisces. So you're trying to be yourself today, trying very hard to be yourself, and you're trying hard, quite hard to accommodate other people. I think you are being quite reasonable today, but you still feel that something is holding you back. It may be the weight of your family, or the weight of your home. And, I know that, Christmas Eve is supposed to be a time for being at home, but maybe you shouldn't be at home. Maybe you shouldn't put too much focus on your home today. So it might be better to, if you want to do any sort of celebrations or whatever, it may be away from your own home, better from in your own home. In your own home, with that Jupiter square Saturn, there could be problems, there could be restrictions. It may just be difficult for people to enjoy themselves. And if you want enjoyment, maybe you should go somewhere else. And the moon is in Libra, and the moon in Libra is about socializing. So I think that socializing and being with people can be very fulfilling. It can be something you can enjoy. And the moon is making a trine to Jupiter, and it's making a trine to Venus. In fact, we have a grand trine in air signs today. So there's a lot of energy. That air signs can be about communication, can be about talking to people. And I think you'll enjoy talking. You'll enjoy moving from one person to another, seeing what people are doing. So even if you can't meet them, it would be a good day for having phone calls, having, a lot of interplay between text messaging or whatever, however you want to communicate. So, that looks good. And so you have to just think, what could spoil it? And I suppose what could spoil it is just spending too much time in one place with one group of people, and perhaps your own home is not the place you should spend too much. You should be spending too much time. And this Jupiter Saturn square it's actually on the Sun, quite close to the Sun Uranus midpoint, and so that might, I mean, if Jupiter is in fact on a direct Sun Uranus midpoint, I think that's the case. Is that right? No, Saturn is on the Saturn. I think is actually on the Sun Uranus midpoint. There you see, there's Saturn on the Sun Uranus midpoint, and so Jupiter is square the Sun Uranus midpoint. So if you stay in one place, you could be asking for trouble. The longer you stay in one place, the greater the possibility that something happens that may not be entirely welcome. Although it might come from you, it may be that at some stage today you feel that you absolutely need to assert yourself and tell people how you feel. And if you do that, there could be consequences. I'm not saying it's something you shouldn't do, but you have to be aware that if you're dynamically individualistic, particularly if you behave like this because you feel that you're forced to behave like it, and that would especially be the case, I think, if you're somewhere familiar. And so familiar ground may not be secure ground. And so, yeah, that's another reason for spending as much time as possible away from your own home, maybe even away from your own family. I mean, I know it's a time for spending time with your family, but maybe you should not spend too much time with your family, maybe. But overall, the moon is trine Venus. There's a grand trine involving Jupiter. So if you handle things right and you're aware of where things could go wrong, I think that it could end up being a very satisfying and even fun day. Capricorn, you, I think, are able to an extent to get into the swing of things. I mean, the moon is in Libra. It's in a high-profile part of your chart, Libra, and it's making a trine to Venus, and it's also making a trine to Jupiter. So this grand trine in air signs, Capricorn, perhaps allows you to maybe sort of behave slightly out of character. I think that you're not going to be totally concerned with material realities, and you're able to, at least to some extent, you're able to relax and enjoy yourself. And I think that in most cases people are going to like you. I mean, after all, the moon is trine Venus. Yet the big event today is a square between Jupiter and Saturn. And Saturn is, of course, your ruler, and then Jupiter comes along and squares it. And this square has been going back and forth all year, or at least since May, because that was when late May, Jupiter entered Gemini, so there became this possibility of Jupiter squaring Saturn in Pisces. And so you may be aware that something needs to be attended to, or something is needing your attention, and it just can't be helped. And it may be that you just feel the need to do more to organize either yourself or other people. Things are not completely straightforward. That might be your feeling. And I think that it's kind of a situation where your natural inclination is possibly to do nothing, to just let things run their course, and not to make your presence felt. That is your natural inclination. That's what perhaps you feel is right. But you may feel that you have no choice but to perhaps interfere. You may feel that that's something you need to do. You have to fine-tune things, because as it stands, things are not properly fine-tuned, and they just need to be somewhat reorganized. And it's a pain, but I think it's definitely something that you can do. Now, if you are a Capricorn and you don't regard Christmas Eve as a holiday, it's just a normal day, particularly if you're working, then actually I think things look good. I think that if you are doing anything of relating to business or organization, I think you'll do a really good job. And you may actually be helped by the fact that it's Christmas Eve, because Christmas Eve, other people are focusing on different things, they're distracted, and this just might mean that you can just get on with it. And so in your own way, you can be very efficient, and you can understand that everything needs to be properly organized, and you understand that the books have to balance, and no issues with the financial dimension. That's good. So there is this smoothness going on with this, with you and the material world. You just get it, and you get what needs to be done. Though I'm not sure what your plans are for today. You may feel that it's Christmas Eve and the working year is over. Maybe you're not working, but if applicable, Capricorn, I think there are some very useful things you can be doing of a financial and administrative nature. You might not want to be bothered, but I think that option might be available to you. Aquarius. Aquarius, there is a grand trine in air signs, kind of. I mean, it's not an exact grand trine, but it's sort of there. We have got the moon in Libra, and it's trine Venus, and it's trine Jupiter. So we've got representatives of all three air signs. And so you being an Aquarius, I think that you can very much benefit from this. And so with those planets in air, I think that it might be a day when things move quickly and fairly effortlessly, and you can move from sort of one place to another, one situation to another, one state of mind to another, and I don't think things are going to be as difficult as perhaps you'd imagined. So Aquarius, if you want something to happen, then it can happen without much effort. And you've got the moon making a trine to Venus. Venus is in Aquarius, and moon in Libra making a trine to Venus. It allows you to, I think, benefit from other people. People are there for you. If you're looking for variety, then I think people are quite able to provide it. And also we've got the moon making a trine to Jupiter. Okay, that moon trine Jupiter, perhaps more of a feature earlier in the day, more of a feature if you're in Australia or New Zealand or East Asia, but still that moon trine Jupiter does affect all of us. And that indicates the idea that there's really no excuse to be bored, because there are so many things to do, so many things to be stimulated by. It's just all happening, and it doesn't take much effort. And I think if things happen that you weren't expecting, it doesn't really matter. Yeah, I know that the moon is in the Veer combustor, and so when the moon is in the Veer combustor, there can be surprises, and there's surprises that come from nowhere, and it may be that you have to even rethink some of your ideas. Maybe you'll be told something that you weren't expecting, and you thought you'd sort of sorted it all out, then you realise something and you think, hold on, this isn't right. Maybe you have to go back to the drawing board. That should be good, because it's stimulating. And a bit of an intellectual challenge, that's good for you, isn't it? And it's certainly no reason to get angry. And I think if you do come across people who you have disagreements with, I think it can be worked out very smoothly. So, in fact, if you've had an argument with someone recently, now might be a perfect time to sort of talk it through, but talk it through in a way that is, this time round, is smooth, and it's not about coming to loggerheads, and so it is a great time for getting on with people, I think, though there is still a certain capacity for surprise, and I don't want to dismiss that. And it's not really just because the moon is in the Vir Combustor. It's to do with the fact that Saturn, your ruler, is on the Sun-Uranus midpoint. I mean, you can see this. There is the Sun, there's Uranus. Saturn is on the Sun-Uranus midpoint. And Jupiter is square Saturn. So we've got Saturn and Jupiter making a square to each other, and Saturn on the Sun-Uranus midpoint. So that might indicate that although everything runs pretty smoothly today, something could happen that you just weren't expecting. And it may challenge some of your fundamental conceptions about the way things are. And I do think that should be welcomed. And also with Jupiter square Saturn, don't think you've got everything sorted out. Jupiter is knocking on the door. Jupiter is perhaps reminding you that maybe you've missed something. And maybe you've missed some really fundamental aspect of who you are. You haven't taken it seriously enough. And you may have been working on most of your cylinders, but not all of your cylinders. There's something missing. There's something missing that could make a big difference. And it's not that you have to work it all out today. I mean, this Jupiter-Saturn square is an aspect that does last for some time. But just consider the possibility that however confident you feel, however wonderful you feel, that something's missing, that things could be even better. And so that is a challenge, but I would have said that that's quite a fortunate challenge. It's a challenge that you should very much welcome. Pisces. Pisces, the big aspect today is a square aspect between Jupiter and Saturn, and it's exact. And Saturn is, of course, moving through your sign. Saturn is in Pisces, and Jupiter is retrograde. Jupiter is your ruler. So you've got Saturn in Pisces. And in a way, Saturn has a strong relationship to you at the moment because it's in Pisces. Saturn is being aspected by you, because Jupiter rules Pisces. And so this Saturn's Jupiter square, I think it does force you to perhaps ask some quite difficult questions about what you're doing and whether you've got it right. And it's not something you have to resolve today. And Jupiter is going retrograde, and so if you're honest with yourself, there have been things that you've been trying to work through, and perhaps you realize that in the recent past you haven't got everything right, but you're now thinking about it again. And even though it's Christmas Eve and everything is supposed to be light, and one's not supposed to worry too much about the future and one's ambitions and one's destiny, there is something there that I think that it would be a good idea if you really paid attention to it. And it may be, Pisces, that perhaps in some respects you realize that you're being a little too rigid. You've wanted too much control. Now, rigidity and control are not the kind of words you normally associate with the sign Pisces, but it's because Saturn is in Pisces. Saturn is right in the middle of Pisces. Now, Saturn is gathering speed. Saturn zooms through late Pisces, goes into Aries next year. It all happens very quickly, and so things are going to change. And just at the moment, you just may feel that something needs to be opened up a little, And it may be that there's a sense of surprise if you're actually honest with yourself and you give yourself the time to think. Then there may be a sense, okay, maybe not of shock, but you start to realize that there's a new aspect to you, a new sense of what it means to be an individual, and you perhaps have discounted it in the past. And it may be that it's just you get a sense of your potential, and you look at yourself and you perhaps see, oh, well, you're not actually making the most of your potential, but now things are changing, or at least you have an opportunity to make change. That's always the case with astrology. You see a potential, you see a possibility, but so often one just ignores it. But it's not a time to ignore it. There's something you've got that I just don't think that you're fully aware of, and that might be the challenge of this Jupiter-Saturn square. Now, I'm sorry to go off on this somewhat serious or not serious. I don't know how serious it is. It's certainly a bit abstract. It takes you away from the fact that it's Christmas Eve. You just want to have a nice day, I suppose. Well, you can have a nice day, not a problem. The moon is making a trine to Venus. Moon is making a trine to Jupiter. That trine Jupiter, especially strong if you're in Australia and New Zealand, but I think everyone can experience that moon trine Jupiter. And I think that today you can enjoy yourself, you can have fun in a quiet way. I don't think it's a day when you want drama. I mean, you can have your own internal drama as you start to work out what you're really supposed to be doing. But in terms of external drama, I don't think that's anything you want. I don't think that's going to be anything you're going to look out for. And I think you're going to want things to be done in a fairly quiet way. I don't think externally you are looking for excitement. Now, tomorrow, Christmas Day, the moon is in Scorpio. That is a different picture. And I know moon in Scorpio is or can be a bit of a problem for some signs, but I think for you, moon in Scorpio is not so bad. I think actually you can benefit from a moon moving into Scorpio in some respects. But anyway, when I do your reading for tomorrow, we can discuss what it means for the moon to be in Scorpio. So let me now turn to the I Ching and consider what's happening today, or what might be happening today from the I Ching's perspective. So I asked the question, what is Tuesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 34, which is the power of the great. And it's not a hexagram we've had recently, I don't think. So the power of the great represents, as it sounds, some great power. A great power that might be beyond us. I mean, I'm not talking about anything necessarily supernatural. It's just power that is beyond us. And I suppose when we think about it, there is a square between Jupiter and Saturn, and today, and so the Jupiter square Saturn represents these, the largest bodies in the solar system, the great chronocrators, the rulers of time. They're coming together, and these planets, they have their own timing, and if we try to ignore that timing, well, we're going to get absolutely nowhere. I mean, it's not for us to move beyond what is possible. And Jupiter and Saturn, in a way, are about restrictions. They are about the limits. Jupiter and Saturn, in terms of the solar system prior to Uranus, the discovery of Uranus, Saturn was the limit. And I mean, I know in theory I've heard that you can see Uranus with the naked eye, but I can't see the Uranus with the naked eye. You can just about see Saturn with the naked eye, even with my glasses, but it has to be the right, you need to know where to look. It's really can be quite difficult. But Saturn does represent the limit, the limits of the known universe, prior to the discovery of Uranus. Or, I don't know, that's maybe not the known Uranus, but not the known known universe. I suppose people knew about the stars, but the power of a great does represent limitation, and we cannot take things too far. And there are 3 moving lines with the power of a great, and the first moving line represents us trying to do something, and the reality is that we haven't got the strength. We just simply have not got the ability to do it. We try to plunge ahead, and there's something we want to get going on, but we just can't do it. It's danger that there's a danger that we just fall over trying to accomplish it, or we just get stuck. And there is nonetheless the possibility that we might continue. We might feel that we absolutely have to get something done today. It won't wait until tomorrow. And then the third line moves, and we get really stuck. So the third line represents the transition point between the bottom half of the hexagram and the top half. So it's as if we're trying to get to that top half. First line, it doesn't work very well, but we plow on anyway, and we shouldn't be plowing on, but we do it. Third line, image of a goat getting stuck in a hedge. Its horns are stuck in bramble. It just cannot move. It can't move forward, can't move backwards, and it's just a bad situation. And so the warning would be, don't go in too far too fast, because otherwise you're going to get stuck. But then the fourth line moves, so we keep going. And I suppose with the fourth line moving, we finally see some action. We can finally start to see some movement. So I suppose perseverance eventually works, but it's really tough, and it may be best not to try. Why would you want to get so badly stuck? But still, the fourth line does have the image of this hedge opening so that we can start to move through and can eventually make progress. And this hexagram, the power of a great, it does move, because we've got 3 moving lines, and it moves to hexagram 7, which is the army. I mean, I always find this hexagram rather difficult, because it just seems so inappropriate. The army, I mean, who has to deal with an army in their daily life? I mean, I know it's supposed to be symbolic, but I do find this hexagram one of the more difficult hexagrams to interpret. And the army is a very social hexagram, and it is about the people we're working with, the resources we're bringing to bear, and it can be from the perspective of the soldier. The soldier becomes part of the army. The soldier gets their strength through being part of the army, and it's by being part of a group and maybe taking orders. I mean, armies are about giving orders and taking orders. I mean, that's what armies are all about. And so with this hexagram, we do need to know our place. And the previous hexagram was about trying to make progress, but it being very difficult to make progress. And with this hexagram, the army, there's perhaps the indication that we can make progress with other people, and also by knowing our role. And I suppose in terms of today, are you mixing with other people? If you are, everyone needs to know their role. And I suppose if anything is being organized today, I suppose sometimes for some people, Christmas Day, if you're into festivities and all of this, is about organization. And in which case, then everyone needs to know their role and perform their role properly. I mean, I suppose the army could be about something else. It depends where you are. If you're in a battle zone, if you are watching this video from a battle zone, then the army can't be ignored. The army might impose itself on you. So, for example, if you're watching us from Ukraine and you're trying to avoid being mobilized or being press ganged, then this would be a serious hexagram. Be very careful. The army, that would mean that you could literally find yourself in the army. But I don't think many people watch this video from the Ukraine. So, but if you are, you don't want to get press ganged into something. Maybe even if you're not in the Ukraine, I suppose we can all get press ganged into something, can't we? It can happen. And then we have to ask, do we want to be press ganged? Do we want to become part of some larger group and follow orders? And I suppose in the end, at least the army can get things done. But then there is, I suppose, the question is, what if we are completely alone? What does the army mean? Then I suppose we have to start to really look at the army symbolically, and we have to start to see the army as being ourselves and what we're trying to organize, what we're trying to do for ourselves. And it may just represent some task we have to do where heavy organization is involved, where if there are orders to be followed, perhaps those orders come from ourselves. So now I want to look at the Jupiter-Saturn square. And there is an exact Jupiter-Saturn square today, and I've looked at it in the past, and I think I need to look at it again, because it really does matter, this aspect. So I might be a little bit chaotic because I'm not quite sure how I'm going to sort of present the information, but here's a Jupiter-Saturn square. So it takes place today at 9:59 p.m. London time. I wouldn't worry too much about when it happens, but exactly. But it does happen today. Okay, it might happen tomorrow if you're in. It will happen tomorrow if you're in Asia, Australia, New Zealand. But there it is. There's Jupiter at 14 degrees 1 retrograde, and there is Saturn at 14 degrees 1 Pisces. And, as I keep saying with this Jupiter-Saturn square, we have to take it back to the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction at the end of 2020. The Jupiter-Saturn conjunction at the end of 2020 was the beginning of a new cycle. Jupiter and Saturn have a cycle that lasts for 20 years. There's approximately 20 years between one Jupiter-Saturn conjunction and another. And looking at recent decades, the first half of the Jupiter-Saturn cycle tends to be more fortunate than the last half, at least in terms of the Western world. So the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, with the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, you very often have chaos to begin with, difficult things to deal with. We were talking about the Federal Reserve yesterday. So in the West, there was a brutal recession in the early 1980s, and there was high inflation, high unemployment, and of course in America, Paul Volcker put up interest rates at the beginning of the 80s, and that caused unemployment, caused major distress, but it did get rid of inflation. And it was kind of, it was kind of the beginning of the Reagan years, although actually Volcker was appointed by Carter, and it was under Carter's presidency that he actually started to put up interest rates dramatically. But then the mid-1980s, you had that pain at the beginning of the decade, and mid-1980s you started to see growth, economic growth. And I suppose in terms of the West, the pain at the beginning of the decade was COVID. And logically, if things had happened naturally, you would have expected now, at the time of Jupiter square Saturn, to be a time of economic optimism and growth. If you look at the 1960s, the mid 1960s. Let me give you an example. So, for example, there was a symbolic time. If you're interested in the UK, here was the British general election on October the 15th, 1964, and there was Jupiter at 24 Taurus, there was Saturn at 28 Aquarius. So that was the beginning of, really was the beginning of the swinging 60s. Okay, the 60s were really starting to swing in the early 60s, but, you had a Labour government. Harold Wilson was elected Prime Minister. He was someone who was very charismatic. He had a vision. He had a vision of a sort of a high-tech world. I think he made this famous speech about the white heat of technology or something like that. And, that was when Britain really started to swing. It was, it was the 60s. And Harold Wilson being elected Prime Minister was very much part of it. So you can see this as a time of really great optimism. And I suppose in terms of the United States, Ronald Reagan in 1984, I think that was before the Jupiter-Saturn square, but he had this landslide victory, second term in 1984, and this was the peak of the 1980s. If you were into the 1980s, you wanted to sort of enjoy all the sort of opportunities of the 1980s. I mean, if you were financially well placed. Of course, the 1980s were miserable for a lot of people. I'm not actually a great fan of the 80s. I think the 80s started quite interestingly, but by the mid-80s, it wasn't really my kind of world. You could say the same thing for the mid-2000s. You had a Jupiter-Saturn square, I don't know, around 2004, 2005. The 2000s started badly with the dot-com crash, 2000, which happened in 2000 after the 1999 boom. The stock market collapsed. It took time for the stock market to collapse, but then you had the Gulf War, 2003, and then by 2004, 2005, with the Jupiter-Saturn square, things really started to move. And so that's why in the past it's often been such a great time. And let's go back to the distant past. The coronation of Elizabeth I. So Elizabeth I is regarded as one of England's most powerful, successful monarchs, and she was crowned on January the 15th, 1559. You can notice I put January the 25th. That is basically my computer program seems to encourages me to switch Julian to Gregorian. So this is actually January 25th Gregorian, but don't worry, this is the date of her coronation, which was January the 15th, 1559. And this is the chart of her coronation, and there's Jupiter in Aquarius, square Saturn. Now, in the case of Elizabeth I, her coronation, that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction took place 5 years earlier or so. I'm not quite sure when. I think that would have happened. I think that happened during the reign of Mary I. So it was a difficult conjunction. When conjunctions seemed to start badly when you had Protestants being persecuted, and Britain things weren't great for Britain. Britain lost Calais, but Calais was the last part of France that Britain ruled, and didn't Mary I say that the loss of Calais was written on her heart? That really upset her. And so Jupiter, you saw the sort of difficulties of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction for England. And then the Jupiter square Saturn, it was a new beginning. Finally, the cycle was getting itself together. We had the new Protestant queen. She was enthroned. This chart was apparently elected by John Dee. He chose this chart, and I don't really want to go into too much detail, into any real detail on this chart right now, because I really want to talk about the Jupiter-Saturn square. But I mean, yes, Saturn is kind of, you would have thought is difficult, but look how Saturn was in mutual reception to Venus. Saturn in Taurus, Venus in Capricorn, and you've got Sun on a mid-heaven because it was done at noon, and Jupiter is a daytime planet. in a positive sign in Aquarius, above the horizon. So in a way, Jupiter was pretty strong. Saturn was quite strong. I mean, there are some other things going on which are perhaps a little bit disturbing, like Mars opposition Saturn. But the point is that for England in 1559, this sort of represented, you could say, the beginning of the English Renaissance, a cultural flowering of sort of music, art, literature, particularly Shakespeare. And so it was a really good beginning for England and for the reign of Elizabeth I. So what does that mean for the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction now? Because if you look at the world right now, there are a lot of countries that are in real distress. For example, Europe. I mean, Europe is in very, very bad shape. Germany is falling apart. The impact of the Ukraine war has been catastrophic, I believe, for Germany, because it was so reliant on Russian energy. Plus, you've had a government that, I mean, it does depend on your ideology, but the German government seems to be not only want to sort of persist with this war in Ukraine, but also has taken action. I mean, I suppose energy has been a real issue, and apparently German companies are leaving the country. I mean, is this Jupiter square Saturn a bright new dawn for Germany or France or even the UK? I have my doubts. And I'm not really using astrology to say that. I just have my doubts. You would have thought this late in the Jupiter-Saturn cycle that Europe would be getting itself together. If the Jupiter-Saturn conjunct square was going to be good like it was Elizabeth I's coronation or Harold Wilson becoming elected Prime Minister, you'd start to see the benefits now. But you're not. I mean, Keir Starmer. If you look at Keir Starmer, Keir Starmer. Let me have a look at Starmer's when Starmer was elected. So when Keir Starmer became British Prime Minister, this is the chart for when he became Prime Minister. We had the Jupiter and Saturn were not exactly in square, but they were sort of moving there. You could say, oh, well, Keir Starmer, this is the beginning. This is when things really come together. This is great. But we already know it's not great. And so Europe is in a sorry state at a stage within a Jupiter-Saturn cycle where you'd be expecting something to happen. And so I do think that there is a problem here, quite a major problem. And we might have to think in terms of this Jupiter-Saturn square as it being divided out. When we think about aspects, we often think about the globe, but maybe we shouldn't. Maybe it's a case some regions prospering, other regions not prospering. Now, before I look at the US and Trump, I just wanted to look at the astrocartography of this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. Sorry, that's a Jupiter-Saturn square conjunction. Let's go back to the Jupiter-Saturn square, and just to consider, where on Earth, how does this affect different places? So this is Jupiter square Saturn set for London. Now, just a reminder, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in 2020 set for London on December 21st, 2020 had the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction at 0 degrees Aquarius on the descendant. And as I've said before, I regarded that as being a very bad omen, a sign of a country on the decline. I mean, the 7th house can be representative of decline. It can represent death. It's a kind of a sunset feeling there with this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction on the descendant. And if we look at the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction set the Jupiter-Saturn square, again we've got Saturn conjunct the descendant. So we have a sort of a double feel there. We've got Saturn on the descendant in the conjunction. We've got Saturn on the descendant in the square. Look at Mercury. Mercury is starting to make a square to Saturn, and so I think that the Jupiter-Saturn square from a UK perspective is really not great, and it seems to me perhaps suggestive of further difficulties, further declines, and I don't think that looks good, and there certainly doesn't seem to be any evidence that Starmer is turning things around. And looking at other parts of Europe, we can reset that square to Brussels. So here is the square set for Brussels, and again that Jupiter-Saturn square that Saturn is exactly on the descendant in Brussels. I mean, Brussels might say something about Belgium. It says something about the European Union. It may even say something about NATO, because I think NATO has its headquarters in Brussels. Is that right? I mean, I should know, shouldn't I? That should be obvious. But Saturn on the descendant represents something grim, a sense of perhaps one's enemies and opponents getting the better of one. I mean, I think that is a possibility, and we perhaps shouldn't be fooled by that Jupiter on the midheaven. I mean, the Jupiter on the midheaven kind of looks good, but we shouldn't forget that Jupiter is retrograde and it's on Gemini. It's retrograde. It's in the sign of its detriment, and it is square Saturn. So I think it's tough times for the European Union with this Jupiter square Saturn, and I'm just completely unconvinced that we're going to see in Europe some economic renaissance. And then, well, we mustn't forget Ukraine, must we? So here's the Jupiter Saturn square from the perspective of Kiev, and what's interesting is not the fact that Jupiter and Saturn is angular. It's the Sun. It's the Sun is at 3. We've got the Sun is right on the IC, 3 degrees 36 Capricorn, and we've got the IC at 350 Capricorn, right on the IC. We've got the South Node exactly on the ascendant. We've got the North Node exactly on the descendant, and with that Sun on the IC, I almost feel that suggests that it is the end of the matter. And there's something, I don't know, I think there's something quite sad about that chart. It is the IC, it's the low point. And, maybe this is a hint that, this war in Ukraine, is perhaps coming to an end. I wonder if there's maybe a parallel between Ukraine and Syria. It's interesting. I mean, I don't know. I may be wrong on this. I'm not really making any astrological point. The Assad regime tried so hard to keep itself going, and it really. Everyone expected the Assad regime to fall, pretty much after the Arab Spring, and it kept going on with incredible resilience, and it got a huge amount of support obviously from Hezbollah, from Iran, from Russia, and it just kept going, and everyone, it was really surprised everyone how long Syria lasted for, and then suddenly there was one attack, and it just collapsed just like that. I'm wondering if Ukraine is going to be like that, rather like Syria. Ukraine just keeps going. Just remembering that Zelensky he's got a lot of stuff in fixed signs. Keeps going, exceeds the odds, getting support. Okay, Syria was supported by Iran and Russia and Hezbollah. Ukraine was supported by NATO and the West, and then suddenly, like Syria, bang. One sunny day, there are Russian troops in Odessa, and it just happens, and the sudden collapse. And that was my feeling with Ukraine to begin with, when I looked at Zelensky's chart. But, I'm perhaps thinking ahead here. It was just a thought with Ukraine and how it's, that chart just does seem to me to be rather sad. And then I suppose we need to consider the United States. And I suppose Americans think about Americans. They're not so impressed with the rest of the world. And this Jupiter Saturn. Okay, let's. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Is that right? I don't know. It depends on Americans, doesn't it? But so here's the Jupiter Saturn square set for Washington D.C. and Saturn is on the midheaven. It is important. So Saturn on the midheaven, I suppose that kind of represents the new president. Saturn on the midheaven, a square Jupiter. I mean, not an entirely easy chart, because you'll notice that the Sun is on a descendant, and Saturn is on the midheaven. So that's a little bit heavy. I mean, it might be about the end of something, the end of a regime. I wouldn't have said it was entirely positive, but perhaps given the context, the fact that Trump is about to become president, that may help explain it. So, in terms of Trump, now there's something interesting about Trump and Kamala Harris, that Kamala Harris and Trump, in terms of their horoscopes, they did have a few things in common. Now, one thing they had in common, I mean, let's look at Kamala Harris's chart. So, Kamala Harris was born with a Jupiter Saturn square. You can see she had Saturn square Jupiter, and so if Kamala Harris had been elected president, she would have been becoming president as a Jupiter Saturn square person, and indeed a Jupiter Saturn applying square, because there was a Jupiter Saturn conjunction in 60-61. So she would have been becoming president with that first quarter Jupiter Saturn square. So she would have been very much aligned with what was going on in the cosmos in terms of Jupiter and Saturn. And so you could say that in terms of the economy and America's destiny, it would have been actually fine if Kamala Harris had been elected president simply from a Jupiter-Saturn perspective. Now, she was born in 1960. She was born in 1964. Donald Trump was born 18 years earlier than her. And is that right? Yeah, about that. And so Donald Trump, in his chart, he also has a Jupiter-Saturn square. There's, I mean, not an exact Jupiter. It's not as close as Kamala Harris's Jupiter-Saturn square, but he certainly had it. Saturn in Cancer, Jupiter in Pisces. Jupiter in Libra. So whoever won that election, you were going to have a new president with a Jupiter-Saturn square, because there was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. 1940, 41? The very early 1940s. Trump was born in 1946, so he was able to benefit from it, and he understands that energy. So perhaps having a Jupiter-Saturn person like Trump as president, that might be a good sign for the United States. And so Jupiter, and also with Trump, his Jupiter and Saturn are in mutual reception by exaltation. So Saturn is in Cancer. I mean, I know it's in its detriment in Cancer, but I mean, whole signs it's in the 12th house. And so I suppose you could say, I mean, I know it's 11th Placidus, but it's in the 12th whole signs, which would mean Saturn joys in the 12th house, which is apparently it's not so bad. Having Saturn in the 12th, but his Saturn in Cancer is in the exaltation of Jupiter. Jupiter is in Libra, which is of course the exaltation of Saturn. So there is that Jupiter-Saturn mutual reception. And so Donald Trump kind of accords with the times in which he is living. And so it may be with this Jupiter-Saturn square that how we're going to experience it, as Trump becomes president, it's his cycle. It's a cycle that he resonates to. And, overall, Jupiter-Saturn squares can be useful, and they can be economically useful, and it may well be, and I'm beginning to think this might be the case, that with Trump becoming president, there's going to be 4 or 5 good years. I mean, 4 good years. I think that the American economy may diverge substantially from the European economy, and Trump will do everything he can to boost America. And of course, you could say that Biden has in a way prepared the ground for this divergence, because Biden's actions in terms of Ukraine have totally devastated the European economy. The destruction of Nord Stream 2, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, was arguably an act of war by America against Germany. So America basically contributed to the wrecking of the German economy, which is kind of good for America because well, for a couple of reasons. It may be German companies are starting to relocate in America, for one, and for another, Germany can't get its gas from the US and from Russia anymore, so it has to get its gas from the US. So one could just see Europe as just being a region in decline. I mean, I think someone's pointed out that Europe was in danger of becoming just an open-air museum, one large museum or something. But that seems absolutely possible unless something happens. But I think this Jupiter square Saturn, I think, is going to be very good for the American economy. I think. Don't trust me. I'm not giving financial advice here. I think there are going to be some wobbles, and I think it's just interesting. But with that, when that Jupiter-Saturn square started to become exact, the stock market and the crypto market, particularly the crypto market, really got really nervous. I haven't looked at what crypto has been doing. I'm recording this on Monday the 23rd, so I don't know what crypto has done on Monday the 23rd, but I don't know what the stock market's doing. But there is that nervousness with this Jupiter-Saturn square right now. But I think as it unfolds, particularly given the fact that Donald Trump has this Jupiter-Saturn square in his chart, and which is in mutual reception, I think Trump is in accord with the times by and large, and we're already seeing a growing sense of optimism in America. Okay, not all Americans, but certainly amongst in a sort of American business, are very, very comfortable with the idea of Trump being president, which is a far cry from what's happening in Europe. If Europe was really going to enjoy the next few years, really develop, we'd start to see the signs, surely, but we're not seeing the signs. So there could be a bit of a problem there. Anyway, those are some thoughts on the Jupiter-Saturn square. I need to think about it more, because I think it is a really important issue, and we need to start to think about the Jupiter-Saturn square. There is one more Jupiter-Saturn square next year. That's when Jupiter is going to be in Cancer and Saturn's going to be in Aries, and that looks like a really interesting square. And I'll be looking at that hopefully in the near future. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I would of course be very grateful if you were to like it, and if you're not subscribed, I would be super grateful if you were to subscribe, and if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. Anyway, thanks again for watching, and yeah, have a happy Christmas, although I think I will be doing a video tomorrow, Christmas Day. And yeah, yes indeed, I will be talking to you tomorrow.